Today, we are going to be brainstorming how the brain named itself. Only the pilot can fly by the seat of their pants.
Well, yeah, the pilot.
How do we know that this is real, right?
Your whole life led up to that hello.
Average human memory.
With like antlers.
Oh,
Brain.
it's just tuned in. Yeah, we talk about that dark.
You can see the nose there.
You can see it?
Respond.
Ooh, let's take a second.
Okay, so I know everybody read David Eagleman's new book, Livewired. It's super exciting to think about how the brain is live-wired, how it's malleable, but it's also really tricky to understand. It's kind of a chicken or egg or snake eating its own tail. It's weird to think that you make choices with the brain, but then what you see and interact with and do and feel is actually changing the physical brain, which is then going to change what you do in the future. So it's tricky to understand, trickier, even more to explain. So how would you even explain it to them?
Yeah, I mean, working with kids, you would have to make it the simplest it could possibly be. And so what I would say is that if your brain is lacking something or not performing in a certain way, then it can compensate for that.
Yeah, the way I would just describe it is that the brain is like its own animal that just has to grow new limbs,
like an animal?
or
That's a good one.
grow like its own body parts that sort of evolve to adapt to its environment. But instead of actual limbs, it's getting new electrical signals and new shapes that can help the person function.
Definitely like a process, like sort of projection, I would like to say, of how life is a process for all of us, and at the same time for the brain it's a process as it evolves, as it continues throughout the whole course of a person's life.
Before reading this book, had anyone ever heard where the phrase "fly by the seat of my pants" comes from?
Yeah, I don't know
I've
where it
never
comes
heard the
from,
origin
but
up
I
until
have
now.
heard it before. I've heard it
Because
before,
their
though.
butt is feeling the airplane.
Yeah, so they use the way the plane moves to sort of
You could fly the
out how
plane
the plane
with your,
moves.
because their butt has been in an airplane for so
Yeah.
long. They're now able to tell how to fly by just
Before-
closing their eyes, using their butt, and then the body
Before
can fly.
having those
I mean, they shouldn't,
instruments.
like in a thunderstorm. Sorry, they won't close their
Yeah.
eyes for no reason.
Before they had those instruments, they were able to just literally fly by the seat of their
But
pants
think-
by
yeah, but-
feeling.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
like the
so
Wright
think of how
brothers.
smart. So they're basically think of how smart their butts are, because they have figured out those butts that have been in those planes.
Oh, the pilot's butts. Are
Pilot's
you
butt,
saying
yeah.
Pilot's butt, yeah.
passengers?
No, only the pilot can fly by the seat of their pants.
Well, yeah, the
So
pilot
passengers
isn't.
can't?
Well, I mean, I guess but they don't have control over the
They're
wheel,
not flying the plane, so they're not doing
I've
it.
heard it as like a saying. Just people say that, right?
Well, sure, yeah. That's just where it comes
Yeah.
from. It comes from pilots who flew
Oh, it
the
comes
plane.
from okay, got it.
Yeah, it came from pilots who could fly through a storm
Oh.
and not see anything
they're flying
visually,
by
but
the-
they could tell. They could tell if the plane was straight or turning to the right, because their butts were so in tune with the small vibrations of the.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the expression just means feeling it out, just sort of going for it.
Yeah.
Right, and we're
Right.
just wasting our butts. You know,
We're
like they
wasting
could be flying and I don't know, making decisions. They could be an input into our brain.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Talking about like a monkey with a rake. Like if the monkey holds the rake, the brain doesn't change. But if the monkey keeps raking in grapes or whatever, the model of the extension becomes part of the brain, and that gets hardwired in. So that's live. He's live wiring into his brain this extension, and that's like part of the self now. You can just pick it up or let it down. But it's weird to think that, that is part of us. And could it be cars, or could it be compressed signals, or airplanes,
Have you guys ever
or
been-
robots? Yeah.
Have you guys ever been like ice skating or roller skating?
Yes, both.
It's like you do that for hours on end, and then the second you step out of the ring, it's like you feel like you're still doing it. Like those wheels or that blade is a part of you,
Yeah.
and
You
like
still
you just
feel it.
can't stop
Or he
going
talks
in that
about the
movement.
treadmill in the book, that right after you get off the treadmill, you're
You
like,
feel like you're
"Why
still
am I
moving because
Oh,
it feels
yeah,
like
for
it
sure.
feels like that movement is a part of you, or it feels like those wheels or those blades are a part of your body. So then
Yeah.
it just feels foreign, like somebody just stripped it away
Right.
from you.
Exactly.
And then when we talk about being ourselves or like falling in love with people, that's because that's their groove, that's their pattern. And in fact, a lot of people will say, don't you wish you had a pill, and then you could make your brain more plastic, and then you could learn a new language. But
Right.
the downside to that he talks about is you could lose your sense of self. Like if,
yeah.
maybe a little bit, if you could make it a little bit more plastic, maybe that would be good. You could learn some new skills and stuff like that. But if you push it too far and you start forgetting what makes you feel like you every time you wake up,
Yeah.
you're going to go back to basically being a baby, and then your brain will start kind of live wiring itself into some kind of a pattern, but that'll be a new person. That'll just be your body.
Would
Yeah.
that make you a baby, or would that make you just a dull person? Like just monotone, like
I think like a baby. Like you
Really?
would be... Yeah, I don't know. I want to make you a dull person. It would make you unable to speak, really, if you go back far. I
Yeah.
mean, it would just be like a baby where you'd have to
if you go
babble
back all the
around
way-
and realize that, like, oh, I can make sounds with my lips. What does that mean? Oh, whenever I try to move them, I get a pattern, so I'm going to make that part of myself. So I now recognize I have lips.
Right.
And then language and all the different layers that
But
come
then
on after that.
we have to go
Okay.
into the part of the book where he talks about different types of memory and how there's that sort of personal memory and that sort of cognitive memory. So like
Oh, wait, remind me that part?
he spoke about this case where there was a woman who disappeared. Her family thought she was dead. They couldn't find her. It turns out she had gotten amnesia. So she was able to remember everything. She was able to remember how to speak, how to drive, how to do all these things, but couldn't remember her past. So these personal matters that like have sort of happened to you are different from like the cognitive memories of like learning how to raise my hand, learning how to speak English. Those are two very, very different things. So would that be a whole different person?
Yeah.
Like if a person still has all their cognitive
Dude, that makes
abilities
so much.
but has none of their personal
So
memories.
I had an anecdotal story where my grandma had a stroke, and then when she was kind of recovering from it, we were like, "We're gonna take you home soon," and she's like, and she thought she lived at a previous address, and we're like, "Wait, you're thinking you live somewhere where you lived, like 20, 30 years ago?"
no,
Yeah.
And I remember just that being weird. But then in the book, he said that's very common because those memories have been etched in at such a deeper level.
Wow.
And I constantly have dreams, which is weird that I'm like at the address. I grew up in Utah, like where
Yeah.
in that neighborhood, and I'm
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
but in the dream, I'm never like, whoa, I'm back in Utah. I'm just
Right.
like, it just feels
where
like
I
right.
am.
Do you ever like wake up after those dreams and you're like, whoa, like where am I? Just for a split second.
Yeah,
Like, do you
for a
ever
minute,
think
yeah.
like I'm not in that room? Like, does that
Sort
feel
of, yeah.
weird?
So David has this wasn't in Livewired, but it's something or maybe it is, but it's something he actually talked to us about at the dinner. He had a theory, maybe it's in the book, I don't know, but that the reason we dream is because the visual cortex can't
Yes, I know what you're
lose
talking about.
its ability to see something. Like you can't
Right.
close it off. It wants to see something. So it's about preserving it, right?
The brain
that
itself
how you
is like in a
understood it?
constant battle for
Yeah, how did you
just
understand
like
it?
just like the way different animals are in a fight for survival,
Right.
just like we're trying to survive, the neurons
It's the
itself is like
brain,
a different species trying to
Right.
live too. So the different neurons are always fighting for dominance so that they
Right.
can live. The visual cortex is always fighting with the auditory cortex and each one is fighting for supremacy. So if it's always dark and we can't see anything during the night, that's like half of our lives, and then the hearing is just going to take over. We won't be able to see anymore. We'll forget how to see.
Oh.
So it's by dreaming that the only way we are able to remember how to see and keep those neural pathways going is by dreaming.
Does that feel right to you? Because I've heard a
Dreaming
few.
is
Because
fun, yeah.
I've heard a few reasons like why we sleep, why we dream is something that's
Yeah.
really
I think
kind
that
of
makes the most sense to me. Like
that we have to dream
that
so
we're
that
fighting
our
to see,
ears
so
don't
we
take
have to
over.
dream.
And a lot of people say like, I don't dream, but like that's unrealistic. Just we
Everyone
forget our
dreams.
dreams. Everyone
Be like, yeah, you just forgot it.
But that's the thing, what
especially if David's right. Then
Yeah.
do you guys remember the part where he's like talking about social babbling or like
Yes.
like that's what babies do. They don't even know why, but they're just like blah 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 blah, and they're like, oh, am I creating that pattern? And then when the body sees some kind of pattern that always happens, it associates that with the self. And I thought that was weird to think about how, yeah, if I always imagined something moved across the room and it always did, I would eventually think to myself, oh, that's part of me. Like, that's
yeah.
part of me. And that's how we eventually come to see ourselves as like two legs and two arms and like a neck
Yeah,
and things
it's
like
like
that.
a baby learning language is, oh, what gets a reaction out of my parents? That must mean something. That must be a word. And we eventually figure out
Yeah.
what it means, what that set of code means to the people around you.
So now think about being a parent, and it's a whole nother thing to worry about, which is that like every time I praise my child, they're building some kind of pathway about what's right.
Right, exactly. And I think a lot of that comes from like socializing too, right? Like being out in the world. And I think we're seeing that, during the pandemic, the CDC like lowered their expectations for a 1-year-old now because they have none of the social abilities to interact with another child that's their age.
Well, so he says social like there was a different type of babbling, but social babbling he describes as when you make a joke and you're like, what's the feedback? Like, do people laugh at it?
Right.
And that's like he was saying, like if somebody makes off-color jokes, and it probably is because they have this long history of friends that have supported that kind of a thing. It's a bigger system problem than just saying like that's not right or whatever.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So because that's, I guess, kind of we're social babbling now because we're
right.
Yeah, and you feel like what you said got a great reaction, so now you feel good.
And that goes into
hopefully we gave you a good reaction. Yeah.
And that goes into learning like a new language too. I'm sure for you, like learning English or like sign language.
The language stuff.
I'm an immigrant from Bulgaria. So growing up, I remember when I first came to the US, it was like nobody knew how to communicate with me. I spoke a language that basically no one around me knew.
Yeah.
So what they did was they threw me in front of a computer and they were like, you go and you learn by yourself. Like just press buttons, figure it out. And I was like, this is just noise. I would like try to, they would make me take tests. And
who's
I would be
they?
like,
Your school?
My teachers. Yeah. I would be taking.
They're like, oh yeah, here's an iPad.
I'd be
like,
taking
sounds like you don't know
tests.
English. Here you go.
And I would be like trying to peek at like the answers of my neighbor, and I would get in trouble for this because I can't read the paper in front of me.
And those letters connect.
Yeah.
Yeah, and eventually it was just through like watching TV, watching different TV shows that I kind of like picked up on what the plot was just by like how they were acting, and like that's how I ended up learning English.
Right.
But like what the most interesting thing is, and they touched up on this in the book, where different generations learn at different speeds. So a 1 to 6-year-old learns in a specific way where language can be picked up very easily. Another language is kind of like very easy to decode. Sort of 8 to 16 is that range where once you grow up, you're generally going to have a little bit of an accent, but you can be almost fluent. And anything after that, it can be very difficult. I actually had that in my family where we had every single generation. So I grew up in that 0 to 6 range. So I think I'm pretty good at English myself.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
My older sister was around 10 years old when she came here. So she has like both those cultures, but primarily raised in the U.S. now that she's an adult.
Yeah.
My mother came. She still has like an amazingly thick accent, and you can see that slow progression of time.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, well, because the baby brain is so able to hear the differences in all the tonations, but once it gets to a certain age, like mine, it's realized that because it's only got good feedback when something sounded like an English word. It was like, let's, not waste our energy predicting all of these other little subtle tones. And then it's gone. And it's going to take so much work to get those back into my muscle memory. And even so, it'll probably never be perfect. I'm just too old at this point,
Yeah,
Guillermo, do you know what? So Guillermo speaks Spanish, but when we introduced him to Matt and they were talking in Spanish and Guillermo left, Matt was like, he's not from Mexico, is he? And I was like, no. And I was like, how did you know that? Because to me, even Spanish is Spanish. And he's like, I can just tell.
No,
it's like
it's different.
El
It's a little
Salvador. Or like he didn't know it was El
nuances,
Salvador, but he was like, I can tell it's not the same kind of Spanish.
Give us some examples, Guillermo, of
Okay. I'm gonna have to get myself in that kind of thought process. Like, for example, and even in the United States, you hear different accents for, Midwest, in the East Coast, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So if you were to go in Latin America, you will immediately see so many differences in intonation. You will hear more like refresco, or it's like at least 5 major, like.
Wow, it's almost like a whole different word at that point then.
Quite so.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I think a lot of it's delivery. Like I can be like,
that's like the social babbling.
yeah,
probably.
I can be like, hi, my name's Dylan. But then somebody who just learning will be like, hi, my name is Dylan.
Yeah, I definitely. You're like, are you thinking real hard about?
You're thinking very
just about
hard
the way
about
you
this
talk?
introduction.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely have that. What about the potato head model of cognition? Did you guys pick up on any of that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Because does the metaphor click for you? Like the potato
The
head,
plug
you
and
stick
play
the, yeah,
method.
you plug and play
Yeah.
anything you want into the brain. Like he talked about, some people are born with tails, or that person with a third arm,
Yeah, that's
and just
right.
like the
That's
brain picks
right.
it up, no
Yeah.
problem. It's like that potato head
Yeah.
model of cognition is such a weird thing.
So cool.
Or how a baby will have a brain that only understands an electrical signal. So they're not seeing things, they're not hearing things, they're not feeling things. Those are different potato head like the ears or the nose that you plug into the potato head. It's brain, Mr. Brain up here. He's seeing some kind of electrical signal. So I guess that's the way
Right.
to think about it. Is it's more generic. The brain's way more generic than it seems like it is.
I think the best example that he used in the book was when he said, I think it was a deaf patient who got a cochlear implant. And the first time they put it in and turned it on, they didn't hear anything. They were like, I feel like I'm being painlessly shocked.
Right. I was
It's
like,
just, I'm being
what?
painlessly
Yeah.
shocked. This is what this feels like. It was a feeling. It was a sensation.
Yeah.
There was no noise involved. And eventually they ended up translating and being like, wait a minute, this might be something else.
Right.
And I think it's that thing
Yeah,
that
because
babies
the brain's
have the
like,
same
oh, wait,
experience.
there's a signal in here.
A baby has never seen before. A baby has never heard before. So all it's doing is feeling zaps. And eventually that's translated and being like, oh, I can process this zap. This is my mother in front of me.
So when so David Eagleman came to Jen's magic show, and we had dinner with him afterwards, and he was wearing a wristband, and the wristband vibrates, and it vibrates. He was saying it can vibrate for any data set, I guess, that you put in. So it could be like the stock market or something like that, but his was set on volume. So the thinking would be somebody who's deaf doesn't know how loud a room is, so they don't quite know if, say you're deaf but you can still talk, you might be too loud or too quiet for the
Right.
room because
Right.
you're not getting a sense for what it is. But this vibrates in a way that tells you how loud it is.
Right.
But the craziest thing probably from the whole book that I really picked up on was that it's not a signal that you consciously think about forever. Like at first it is, right? If this thing vibrates more based on how loud it is, it'll just be like, well, that's vibrating a lot, must be loud. But after say weeks or months, it's just a sense that you have. You don't think, oh, it's vibrating a lot, must be loud in the room. You feel like the room is loud
Yeah.
in some
Wow.
way that doesn't do it justice to just say it's vibrating a lot.
It's like the
Just
way-
like saying I'm looking at something isn't, oh, you have a lot of like electrical signal going into your brain.
Yeah,
Or
You're
when
like, no,
you're,
I can
when
see
you're
it.
reading a book, you don't see the letter A and see, oh, that's the shape of this arch.
Right,
And then
yeah,
that translates
exactly,
to an
yeah.
A. No, you're like, that's ah.
Yeah. Or a color. Like if we see colors and we can describe it, but if we didn't all have eyeballs that saw them, the color purple would just be a description of the electromagnetic
everything's
waves.
automatic.
Right.
Yeah.
When driving a car, a lot of times you'll just zone out and be like, how did I drive that much?
Yeah.
I didn't even notice. But everything's just so
Yeah.
automatic.
But that also opens the door to all these other senses. So
Right.
magnetic north was one example. Birds always
Yep.
know which direction they are. Whatever tactile sense we could get, especially through the skin, which is just this open, I mean, we could just be sending all sorts of signals in there.
Definitely.
Or the tongue, I guess he said the tongue was actually a better place. So if you really wanted to have a sense for, say, the stock market, or, you could have Gio's heartbeat, say, on your tongue, and then you would always know if his heart, like you would be like, oh, are
His
you,
heart rate. Yeah.
Are you
Yeah.
stressed right
Are
now?
you nervous? Are you stressed?
yeah, be like,
Yeah.
what's going on at work? And he's like, sorry, blah, 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 and you'd be like, I can
Right.
feel it on my tongue. Like it's, yeah.
Insane.
Or on your skin or wherever.
But you
it's
wouldn't
connected.
have the sense of, oh, my tongue is vibrating. That means he must be stressed.
Yeah, no, you would feel stress.
Right.
I guess you,
It would translate
yeah,
automatically.
probably,
stress.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
like
guess after a
language.
while, maybe even, well, it's weird because I guess stress would probably have
Well, you said
chemicals.
David
but-
Eagleman had that bracelet on
Yeah.
when he
Yeah,
was
he-
there.
yeah, he had it
Considering he's a person who isn't deaf, who isn't blind,
Right.
how was he interpreting it?
Well,
Since he
I
does
don't
have
know.
all
We
those
didn't. I mean, I just saw it on him, and he's saying that's what it was tuned for.
He didn't go into detail
No,
about the
I
experience.
I wish I
Oh.
would. I wish I would have asked follow up questions. But the dinner with David, you always it's like why did, like
You're like
this-
so many
yeah.
questions, and then you don't think of them because you're so excited.
I asked him if there were a clone of 3 people, and one person was awake, and the other person was sleeping, and the third person was in lucid sleeping, and they were all hooked up to an MRI machine, but the person awake was actually in, say, this room, say, like sitting in this chair, and then the person who was asleep was dreaming they were in the chair, and then the third person was lucid dreaming that they were in the chair. Like they're in the chair, they know it's a dream, but they're also aware of their dream. Like how would their brains be detectable? What would be different? And his answer was like 4 seconds. He's like, yeah, I could tell the difference between all of them. I was like,
you're like,
yeah, but I don't know. For some reason, I thought this would be like,
it was so underwhelming.
Yeah, I thought he would be like, I can't believe you've broken my brain with your intelligent question, young man. Like, I need to set up a study to figure that out. But he's like, oh no, I could easily tell the difference.
This is his whole life. He knows everything about this.
Like, dang, there is so much to know.
And then it was like a few seconds of silence because I was like, I'm sure he'll follow up with something. And then he's like, Jen, how was the magic show? Or something. Like, and then he was like, you had a great magic show. I was like, oh, great.
I was watching this video on Albert Einstein. And when he was like at the peak of his fame, people would apparently come up to him constantly and just want to talk about science and talk about his discoveries, and he's like, this is what I do for a living. I just want to be left alone for 1 second.
I know. Yeah, it is true, because he was asking me about my beans and stuff, my bean collection. He's like, oh, I'm sorry, because he's like, yeah, I'm thinking about doing morning fasting.
Like anything else,
and I was
but
like,
neurology.
I know. I was like, dude, people love talking about that. All the most interesting people I know are like, tell me about that bean collection of yours. I'm like, really?
That is,
like, we should talk about something else.
Most people don't have a bean collection.
Yeah,
I know.
you should make a YouTube video about your bean collection.
On a tangent, everybody's aware, like, something's wrong with American food. They're like, I don't know about eating meat every day and fast foods, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, so they all think, they're like, what's the deal with beans? Do you know something I don't know? And I'm just like, I don't think so. I'm just really into them.
What about that one guy with the beans?
Yeah, like,
Let's do an episode on the beans, Dylan.
So what about did you catch that there's a chemical in our brain that's called acetylcholine maybe, or acetylcholine? And if that isn't running throughout your blood at the time of learning something new, or I guess in your brain, that's why if you're not engaged with something you're learning, it's not going to go in as deep. And that's actually why, because there's that chemical
the brain,
or protein or whatever it is.
The brain picks and chooses its battles.
Why are you going to store every single thing that you see? Like, I probably won't remember this tomorrow, I'm not going to lie. No, I'm just kidding.
No, you might not. It depends on how emotionally charged it is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then like he went into the book, it's that sort of positive versus negative reinforcement and associating that emotion with it. He used the example of 2 parents training their kids to become chess champions, and they would like give them a hug and give them positive reinforcement every time they did well.
And they all became experts.
But if they had that one kid who like decided, I'm going to do tennis, and was never praised for doing tennis, and it was just like, that's what you do, there is never that positive memory associated with it. There's never emotional stimuli. And that's why I think that's sort of argument where positive versus negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement helps to an extent, but positive is what sticks.
Yeah.
Because that chemical is able to be released and it remains in the memory.
Right.
I have always wondered about whether or not you would lose one skill if you gained another. And I picked up on, I had like the emotional moment when he was talking about there's a bicycle, and one of them is normal and the other one is backwards. So if you actually turn the handlebars to the left, the wheel goes to the right. And whenever anybody gets on it, they just fall over. Like, nobody can just ride this bike right off the bat. For some reason, cognitively knowing what's going to happen helps you 0 when you first get on it.
Right.
But if you get enough of an effort to it and give it enough time, and you can ride this reverse bicycle, and then you get on a regular one, it's fine. You can actually that part of the brain can take back over. It's not like you have to lose one. Like I was like, maybe you can't get on the first one. You know what I mean? Like, your instinct wouldn't be there. But it seems like we can learn kind of unlimited skills without losing other ones, as long as we're constantly learning throughout life.
Definitely, right.
Mm-hmm.
I guess when you're princessing, are you thinking about when you reward kids for good behavior or something, or do you look at the one that's?
I don't think about rewarding that. I do think of trying my hardest to be fair in giving attention to all the children, because I think as a princess performer, like, me being there is the reward, right?
Oh, yeah. You're like, being in my presence.
My presence is the reward.
Listen, kid, you are lucky you're about to hug Princess Jasmine or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are talking to royalty,
Yeah.
But, I think I try to give attention to others who are rude. I intentionally...
don't give them princess eyes?
Don't give them princess eyes.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
no.
Yeah.
Dude, that'll be
Do
with
the
them. Yeah,
cold
those kids will be hurt
shoulder.
forever,
Yeah,
man.
The Elsa cold shoulder. That's what I give them.
Dang. What about synesthesia? I hope I'm saying that right, but
Synesthesia.
synesthesia?
Yeah.
What's your experience
Yeah.
with?
So
have you ever met anyone? Or?
So I think it's so interesting that like this person can taste like a word. For example, the color purple.
It's a perceptual phenomenon in which a stimulation of one sensory or cognitive pathway leads to involuntary experiences in a second sensory or cognitive pathway.
Oh, second sense. So you
Yeah.
see,
It's like
hear
you can
something you
see
should
or
hear.
taste or
It's like if all your senses were just these wires plugged into the brain and somebody took them out and just mixed them up.
yeah.
Whoa. So you can smell a book, or
So
you can smell.
Well, yeah, we can all smell books.
Hold on.
Yeah, that's
You can
fair.
smell
you
a
can smell
word
the
on a
words
book.
as
Yeah.
you smell it down the.
I
words
had, and
or
I think
something.
I think they touched up on this in the book, but a lot of synesthesia cases are all different. So
Yeah.
different people's senses react in different ways. I actually had a close friend who had synesthesia, and she was telling me this experience of she knew somebody who was hiding something, and then she was talking to them, looks at them, and goes, "Whoa, your face is blue right now," because they were lying.
No.
And it's that sort of thing. Like your senses, like she visibly saw their faces blue and didn't realize what was happening until later.
That's
I would
like-
love to spend an afternoon in that brain and
It's
just
like a psychic.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What? How do you sense someone's lying? Like I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
unless they're really obvious, right? But you see a blue face. That's crazy.
It's just the senses. It's an unconscious observation.
right.
Yeah.
Wow. See, I thought it was like if you say the color purple, like someone tastes waffles or
Oh,
something.
yeah.
It can be. It can be.
It can-
but everybody's is different.
Right,
That's
like you
the
said,
thing.
everyone's
You're like-
different. I didn't know that. I thought it was like
she's like,
just like
look at that dress. They're like, delicious. And you're
dress.
like, what?
Chicken.
Yeah.
Like
Looking back, do you guys have any memories of a time where you felt stuck and you kind of live wired your way out of the problem, I guess? Like, do you...
I mean, having like anxiety and panic disorder, I definitely felt stuck. I would get panic attacks in the classroom. And so me being a polite child, I didn't want to leave and go take care of myself, like, you know, and try to take some breaths. So I just felt stuck in my brain. And I think I went through the fight or flight, right? And I always fought. I always just sat there and just like, you know, rubbed my palms or did something to try to soothe myself.
Because your brain must have got caught into a groove that was panicky, I guess.
Yeah.
And
It's a
then...
defense mechanism.
Yeah.
But like that's
But where'd that
interesting.
come from? Because you didn't get praised for being
For being
panic
anxious?
attack. Yeah. Or were
I
you?
think-
Or maybe... I don't know. You tell me.
For
Maybe
being anxious, I think it actually, my personal case stems from how I was raised. My mom was very careful. Don't touch that. Go over here. Oh, no, you
like
can't do that.
everything could
You
be
have
a danger.
I'm precious. I am cargo, right? And then it just kind of activated my senses in a way where if I would feel stress or I don't understand a math problem, then I start freaking out and my body goes into a whole different mode. You're nauseous. You can't breathe. You're about to die. Those are the thoughts that kind of go through my brain. And to try to get out of that, it was pretty hard.
And if we learn it as a child, it does become habit. I mean, who
Right.
doesn't get attention when they're getting a panic attack? The child knows like that's how I react,
Yeah.
and that's how somebody can come and help me because I'm in a
Sure.
state of distress.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you would be able to tell if I was in a panic attack. Like, I don't
Yeah.
think anyone.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
You can conceive
like
it?
literally, I would have a panic attack right now, and I'd be talking to you,
And you'd be, like, just so polite
the one
about
thing
it.
Would know.
distracting me is talking. So I really want to mask it so bad so that you don't know
Whoa.
that I'm having a panic attack right now.
Have you
I'm
had
not.
a panic attack around us? Who knows? Oh,
Are you having a panic attack right now?
It's natural, but anyway, I digress. Do you think language maybe kind of help bridge that gap for you?
Eventually, yeah.
Like once you didn't feel that you couldn't communicate through language, or do you still feel that struggle?
I don't necessarily feel that struggle, but there was definitely the isolation aspect of it.
Yeah,
And I think
definitely.
that follows you. There's similar like with the panic attacks. That's a very isolating experience.
Yeah.
And like I can only imagine always feeling trapped in your head in that way.
Right.
Why is it that you developed that defense mechanism where you don't show it externally and you do keep talking?
Right,
Because
yeah.
that's your adaptation method.
Yeah.
I've noticed like even now when I need to self-isolate, when I'm in an argument with a family member, I will automatically transition into my mother tongue
Wow, yeah.
automatically I cannot speak English when I am upset, because it's that sort of thing. That's when you self-isolate.
So I remember thinking a few times about how the brain has that natural desire to have a baseline, right? So that's why like drugs and everything, like you get a high and then it's like doesn't do it anymore, and your brain's. But even when he was saying you look at a waterfall and you see water moving for a while and you stare at it, and then you look at a rock or a wall, there'll be a reverse tendency to feel like the rock's kind of flowing upwards, because the brain started getting used to that motion.
Right.
And that's why he's like, obviously probably doesn't exist, but theoretically, if there was this kind of like cosmic rain everywhere, as little babies, we would have tuned it out, and we like nobody would see it even if it existed. And
There
it's
is.
like,
It does exist.
Good.
In, like dust particles.
yeah, we just like tune them out probably.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at a light, you can technically see them, but they're like always around us.
Always.
Yeah.
There are like hundreds and hundreds of them.
Yeah, you're right. Exactly. We just like
Our
tune
nose,
it out,
when-
or a certain sound.
Our
or
nose is
whatever it
always in the peripheral of our vision. If you pay attention, you can see the nose
Right,
there.
exactly.
Shut
the brain-
up! You can see it.
Can't you see your nose?
Can you
Like,
not
think
see
about
your
it.
nose?
Think about it. It's a little
Of course
blurry.
I can't see my nose.
It's a little blurry, but your brain
Has
filters
just tuned it out. You know what? It's just tuned it out because there's that dark
it's
spot.
there,
Yeah, we
yeah.
talk about that dark spot in your eye. Like if you put on contacts with a little black spot in the middle, it's still, you won't see anything because there already
Exactly.
is a black spot there, and you
Right.
just don't need it.
Exactly.
So weird. Like who knows what we're tuning out? You know, like the
Yeah.
brain has removed so much from our environment. The signal that you get from your vibration might be something that's like I don't know if you know tons about like how compression works from a software point of view, but what you do is you take something that's very complicated and you see patterns in it. You come up with an algorithm that says just unpack this algorithm because it can explain the like stuff that repeats a lot. Instead of saying like 100 pixels of blue, you can just say like take it and then multiply it by 100. So the compression is smaller, but we should be able to pick up any kind of compressed information too. So there potentially could be like your butt, instead of just learning from the airplane, we could potentially have a much more complicated signal, like maybe a book or something like that, and it could be compressed into a small file, and then that could be put on your tongue or a vibration, and maybe we could start absorbing information at a hyper rate. It's complicated, but it's just interesting to
Wow,
think
that
that
is so
like in the
interesting.
future, our kids or whatever, they might just put on vests or
Right.
maybe connect directly right into the electrodes of the brain or put stuff
Right.
on their tongue, and then they could read Wikipedia faster than our eyes could ever, line by line.
Wow.
Yeah, just like Mother Nature is able to evolve our senses to reach a certain point, maybe we could push that forward.
Yeah, but no data is intelligently compressed in our reality, but we could use that and then absorb compressed information. I don't know. It's just
Considering
interesting to
that
think
like information is literally just electrical signals in our head, what if we were able to have just a little buzzer, like a helmet we could put on that just zaps our head, and then we learn any kind of info? We just knew how to make that little electrical
Translate
signal.
that.
Yeah,
Wow.
dude, the world could be anything we
We
wanted
could
to
learn
be.
anything. Well,
Could
there
that
would be no
dangerous?
There could be no use in studying. What would be
Right.
the point?
Right.
Well, especially like it talked about
You'd have like a leapfrog zapper. Sorry.
No, we could. Yeah, whatever.
Right? Like-
Yeah, I'll roll with it. Yeah, whatever you're thinking.
That's crazy. Okay.
But
go
like,
on.
there's
Someone had like a mutation where they just couldn't dream. Their mind couldn't do that.
then do you think they would just wake up? They would just go blind? Maybe they'd spend
Well,
too much of their
blind
time not
people-
using their eyes, and the brain would stop receiving.
Maybe
those
that's when like
signals?
vision can start becoming faded and that sort of thing.
Right. Doesn't he describe that like people in older age, like they dream a lot less because of that, because their vision is starting to deteriorate.
Oh,
Yeah. That's
I guess I missed that
that
part.
was a
Yeah.
good. Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
That is
that
weird to think about.
chapter. And then blind people, they dream, but they don't dream in vision. They dream with their other senses.
How weird is that?
Yeah, I would love to talk to a blind person and say like, what does your dreams feel like? Like, do they?
But that's like asking you you describing what sight is. If you've never experienced it, how can you ever know?
Yeah, but I've experienced touch, right? So if
Right.
he says my hand vibrates, I know what a hand like.
That's
well, I guess
true, yeah.
not necessarily in his way, but or their way. But I just thought that was so interesting. That's very true. Good point.
So just going back to like how the brain named itself, like does that like
That freaks me out.
yeah, of course, yeah. It's really weird. Like it's like how did something evolve the ability to name itself? Like is it because those neurons were all
What is the evolutionary benefit of being so conscious of itself? Why do you
I don't
think that
know,
would
like a theory of mind.
why did we evolve to just be aware of ourselves and aware of the brain?
So I've kind of heard that it was sort of about like you're predicting if someone's going to like steal your food or hurt you or if they're your friend. And then we really evolved the ability to guess what someone else is doing. But then we looked at ourselves and we're like, oh, that person is us. So because have you ever tried to, it's hard to think about what someone else is going to do and think about what you're going to do at the same time was the argument. And it's not from David's book, but I've just heard that before. So it's like the theory of mind seems like maybe it evolved for that reason.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know.
Have you ever heard the saying like we have a relationship with ourselves?
Yeah.
Like we have a relationship
Yeah.
with ourselves the same way we have a relationship with other people. So I guess it's that sort of thing where you look at other people, what are they going to do? Why are they? And then you look at yourself, and that's where the existential comes in. Am I a friend or a foe? While looking in like the river, looking in the river and seeing your reflection and being like, who is that?
Crisis.
Yeah, I've caught myself talking to myself in my brain. I'm like, you think you deserve sympathy? You're not even working hard. And I'm like, come on, Dylan.
A
like,
Jekyll and Hyde
And I'm just like, what? Yeah.
Exactly. Jekyll and Hyde's a great example
Do you have
for that.
I'm guessing, do you have a voice inside your head that, can you talk to yourself?
Always.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Inner monologues? Yeah.
Yeah, some people
I've-
don't have them.
Some
Most
people
people
don't
do,
have
though.
that, and
Yeah.
it's like I've heard so many people be like, if you on a scale of 1 to 10, how visually can you see an apple? If I told you I was holding an apple right now, can you describe the texture? Can you
Yeah.
describe the color?
Yeah.
Some people are at a 0. Like they
Really?
can just understand the concept of an apple,
They're like,
but
I
like
know
they
what an
don't
apple
hear
is,
or
but I
see
can't see it.
anything.
That's
Wow.
so, yeah. To me, I
crazy.
have definitely a voice in
How
my
how
head.
easily can you go to sleep if you don't have that criticism voice in
I
your head?
heard
Like,
they just fall asleep like
I know.
that.
They
Like, I
must-
heard they just sleep like, oh, I'm awake. I'm asleep. Just
here
like,
I am thinking about something that happened 5 years ago, hearing that
Right.
critical voice, and you just go to sleep in 5
What's
seconds.
wrong with you?
Yeah. Oh my
that's-
gosh.
That's crazy. No, also the tongue, like you can bite off your tongue, right? But your brain prevents you from doing so.
Oh.
Haven't you heard
Oh
of that?
yes,
Yeah, you can bite your
the
finger
jaw is
off,
strong enough to bite off your finger, but the
But
body will never do
will
it.
never let you.
Well,
Yeah.
that's weird to think about.
Isn't
Yeah.
that
It'll
crazy?
always stop you before you can do it.
Yep.
Yeah, probably.
Like a carrot is about the
God,
strength
that's
of a
weird to think
finger,
about, though.
but our senses can detect what a finger
For sure,
feels
the
like.
carrot's like,
Yeah,
Yep.
but they have about the same strength in reality. But we would never be able to put that force on a finger, even if it was a different
have a
human's
carrot in the
finger.
fridge. I just like that
Oh, no.
crack. I do it all the time. I just like,
Exactly.
I love eating carrot. Yeah, that is
Yeah.
weird to think about. But well, that's like I don't know if this was from the book either. This is from the podcast maybe. But he was doing one study. He talked about this on Lex Freeman's podcast where they would poke a hand on the screen. So there'd be like a hand, and then a needle would poke it, and then they had people watch this video, and they would measure how much they reacted, like how.
Is that testing their empathy?
Well,
or?
in this case, they had labeled different hands to different people as different groups. I don't know, a certain race or a certain minority, or basically an in group or an out group. And then they would measure, like if it was another like American or something, I would probably feel on average more pain when I saw a hand that was labeled American. Even if this was the same hand, they just like relabeled it. But it shows how we kind of perceive the out group or the in group differently. And that's, I don't know if that's like hardwired in, but it seems to be like a very true thing that we need to be like conscious of as a society, because there's just this natural instinct. Even when David's lab was randomly assigning people, like you're now part of this group, and they just made up a name. It wasn't even a real group.
Right.
But as soon as one set of people was in one group, one set was in the other, and the hands were labeled that way, they didn't feel
Wow.
as much pain when the out group was hurt.
Yeah,
They
it's
felt
about how
more
you
pain when the
identify
in group
yourself,
was.
what bubble you put yourself into.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
crazy.
yeah. And I guess so we'd have to consciously offset for that if we want to have a fair world, because it's just going to be
Right.
easier for us to look at people who aren't us and say,
Right.
oh, that doesn't hurt
Well, that really,
my brain
like,
as much.
Exactly. Exhaust the importance of identity, right? And why people feel so confident in one way and not in the other. That's so interesting.
So like another metaphor I wanted to bring up was that he talks about if you were a traveler and you went to another country, how if the traveler, instead of learning the native language, just kept yelling like louder and louder and louder, how the entire country would eventually learn the person's language. So the brain is kind of different than what you think of as a normal system, because one signal, as long as it's continual, it's got a pattern, and it just broadcasts, the whole brain will like rearrange itself to fit that new signal. You know, and that's such a weird way to think about it, because we would never just get one person in the United States with a new language and assume that nearly everybody in the country would eventually know that language to make that person feel welcome.
Yeah. But then we see that all the time with like different settlers who go into different countries and that sort of thing. Like even how the United States was made. That's how it must have started. That's how they must have started communicating. You just repeat the same thing and you point, and eventually it sticks.
Eventually they're like, we got it. We'll pick it up. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. What about, did anyone get the metaphor when he was saying that if you ask where's the economy located in New York City, there's no place.
Right.
But you could see in an fMRI machine that there's more economy where the financial district is than where the farming district is.
Right.
So you might accidentally say that's the part of the brain that does the economy. You know what I mean? So if we're like, oh, that's
categorizing.
But we always, so we need to stop that concept that when we look at a brain, this is like the visual cortex and this is the auditory.
Thing.
It is the visual cortex because visual information is wired into it, so it's grown. But the brain could have been anything.
It's the home of the visual, but it also leaks into the other areas.
Yeah, and it is. Yeah, it could be. The brain is just a massive parallel processing machine. It can pick up whatever.
And that takes us back to the first case that we talked about, where it was like the kid who had half a brain, where they had to take out half of his brain, but all of it was still retained, and he was able to learn everything again. Technically, half of his brain should be gone. So, like, say the auditory and the visual cortex should be gone, and he should never be able to see and hear again. But he was.
Yeah.
Because all of it is able to adapt. All of it can become those hubs. None of it was actually taken away.
The thing is that we have a lot of competing processes, and that's what keeps things in equilibrium, right? Like if the waterfall is going down and we look away, like there's just a lot of stuff in the brain that's trying to both go left and right, and that's how it like sort of stays in the middle. And because of that, some things percolate up because of like small variations in all these sort of competing signals, and that's how we end up with whatever thought actually comes out of our mouth, whatever conscious awareness that we decide to have. So if you think about the entire world as different people, all with competing thoughts, when you look at Twitter and you see the top 10 trending right now, that's essentially the number one thing there would be if the whole human consciousness was alive and they were all on Twitter. If Mars or the moon was like, hey, Earth, what are you thinking about?
So we're all the little neurons. We're all the little neurons that are processing different information.
Yeah, we all have these little competing things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, because we can all present anything on Twitter that we want, but it's the who's going to like catch it, you know? And certain people on Twitter, I don't know, like Rihanna or the Kardashians or something, when they say things, it's very likely to kind of jump up, but it doesn't necessarily mean it will be the number one thing every time, you know?
Well, you got basketball.
Yeah, so let's pretend Mars was like, yo, Earth, what are you thinking about, you know?
Yeah.
Of course, Mars would be like, I don't even have Twitter. Like, be like Mars would just be so dumb. Earth would be like, I don't even want to.
Not even going to try.
But
not worth it.
Mars is just behind the times at this point.
But once we get some people on Mars, then they would have their own Twitter, and then they could. Then we would have.
But would they have their own Twitter, or would they be linked? Would it be a?
Oh, you're right.
Solar system.
We could make the division, just like cutting the Earth in half. We could have two different, like the two hemispheres of the brain.
The brain.
Yeah. Yeah, because underneath our brain there were a lot of things that you wanted to say that you didn't, because your brain almost said something that you didn't actually say, because it was the second most likely thing, but then the cascade of neurons tipped in a certain direction.
It's sort of like those stories you would hear about the fortune teller who's trying to predict the future and sees all the pathways. Think of like Doctor Strange from Marvel, can see all the possible futures, and then you go for one line. The brain itself is always, even though it's kind of unconscious, the brain is always coming up with possible scenarios, and then you go with the one with the most probability to work.
Whichever one just pops out. That can be in like certain things pushed it, but your whole life led up to this exact moment.
So
the next word that comes out of your mouth, which is
hello.
Yeah, hello. Like,
exactly.
yeah,
Your
because-
whole life led up to that hello.
So, yeah, so think about that. Just in
Exactly.
that second when I was like, is what? Your brain
Yeah.
was like,
It's like,
okay,
I don't
okay, I
know.
want to socially interact. He's asking me a
Sure.
question. What would something that would pop into
It's
someone's
like respond.
Yeah.
Respond. Yeah.
Yeah, and then like a Mad Libs kind of thing when you're
Yeah.
like the blank went to the store.
Give me a verb.
Yeah.
So when the brain doesn't have what it needs, it sculpts it. That's a quote that I took from the book that I really thought was super interesting because I think we were talking about it earlier about the sensations, right? It will compensate in a different way. So like the deaf person that got the cochlear implant would feel the vibration instead of the actual sound when it was actually sound. I thought that was super cool.
Oh, no.
When you were a kid, did you ever like look at yourself in the mirror for like a long time?
Or like the moment
then
you
get
figured out that you're...
disoriented?
Oh.
Have you ever done that? I used to do that as a
Explain more.
kid.
Like, did it
I would
disassociate or
correct. I would-
disorient? Like, what do you mean
A
by
little
that?
bit of both, right? Like it would feel like an out of body, like what am I touching? This is what my nose looks like. This is what my eyes look like. And then like the reflection, that's a person. I'm a person. And you would have, yeah, I would
I
have those
physically
Like,
exist
that
in this
is
You're like,
me.
you are the
Oh my
craziest
God.
7-year-old I've ever met. Yeah.
Like, yeah, just staring at yourself in the
yeah,
mirror.
I would just stare at myself in the mirror and be like, oh, okay. Like, try to understand.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
To the gym, I always see those guys like looking at themselves, but
I'm
they're
a
probably not like,
narcissist.
am I conscious? They're probably like,
Is that
Like,
really
what
what the
chicks
gym
dig
bros
this
are
or
thinking
whatever.
this whole time?
Yeah.
They're
just all
deeper than we
they're just all
thought.
super smart. Keeping your brain plastic as you get older means that we have to keep challenging ourselves. So when we were talking to him, he said that in his house, he constantly rearranges where the silverware is and like where the paintings are. And of course it like drives his wife nuts, but she's also a neuroscientist. So it's like,
Oh, that's
they're like,
cool.
okay, I get
Oh,
it.
wow.
You know? And I was thinking like, what are you guys going to do in the future to keep your brain plastic? Because in some sense,
Time's ticking.
well, it's constantly doing what it should, which is optimizing your life. It should be easier to drive to work once it memorizes the path. But
Right.
you have to consciously say, now I'm going to take a new path to shake it up a little or something. So how are you planning to keep your brain plastic as time goes on?
I like to read. I also like to learn new languages. I think that really helps, especially like something so foreign. I know a bit of like
Language is a
Latin
good one.
languages.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I feel like if I went into like maybe Chinese or something that really
yourself,
challenges me with like tones and stuff like that. I think that's interesting, and I could use it in my real life, you know, if I want to travel and kind of do
especially in
that.
like to me it seems like if you were traveling in a place where you needed to learn the language, you would
really
completely because the brain is so social and language is such a big part of
Right.
it. I feel like that would be, in fact, some people with Alzheimer's have no symptoms outwardly, not because they're not actually suffering from it, but because they've just been constantly building new paths to the point where nobody can tell. They're just rebuilding so quick. So
Right.
The memory is deteriorating, but it's kind of like that example he used of the monkeys that had the nerve damage and they weren't able to move one arm. So you put the good arm in a splint so that they're forced to use the bad arm. You're
right,
forced
right.
to use that bad memory, and
Right.
eventually it develops.
Right.
yeah.
Eventually it gets better.
So I had a few years ago, I read this stuff about how we have so many nerve endings in our hands and feet, right? Like they're
Yes.
extremely dense. And when you hold an object, you can sense so much. Like if that cup is like touching my arm, I can not sense quite as much as my hand because there's so many neurons, right?
Yeah.
And I felt really bad for all the neurons on my feet because they haven't done anything with them. I can't grab anything. I barely
So is
walk
that
on
what
it.
you plan to do?
Well-
Is to grab cups with your toes?
Well, like there's people like there's this archer that can like hold the bow with his feet.
That's
and
right,
There's people
yeah.
like missing arms and they can learn to do things like move a spoon and like all these
Have
things.
you seen the piano player who plays with his feet?
No, Guillermo, can you
Yes.
bring that up? Piano player that plays with his feet.
He is absolutely amazing.
Incredible.
I bought all these weird rugs and carpets and these like kind of funky things to stand on, and I threw them all over the floor here because I was like, Jen, we should walk around barefoot and it will help keep our
She's
nerves.
like, okay.
Yeah.
I don't think you're giving your feet enough credit. I mean, like, think about all the things you go on. Like, we have a carpet in here and then we have wooden floor. That's a whole new
Well, but I
sensation.
protect it with my shoe. Like the shoe is the problem. Like,
But then
it's
you're
not,
experiencing
Is
different
it?
levels, aren't you?
it's a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that they haven't. I mean, they obviously can walk and keep me up.
They're not
right?
uber sensitive.
But
yeah.
think about the pleasure that my foot's going through when it steps on the grass or walks on. I mean, I'm sure you
Sand,
have a memory of
yeah.
walking on the beach because that sand is like overwhelming to those nerve endings. So I wanted to create that at home, but then it just was such a pain, and we were tripping on it, and it made no sense. And nobody wanted to be barefoot, so we ended up like throwing those all away.
What
the
I'm
whole
hearing
house.
from you is that the feet aren't worthy
No.
of the new sensation. I am not
I
going to
feel
take
guilty.
this
I
feet
need to maybe I'll
slander.
buy them again.
I feel like you could do like those fidget toys, like with your feet. Like, you know how you like pop those like little bubbles? I don't know if you've seen any of the
Like
fidget.
imagine you're just sitting there
And you're just like trying
pop,
to do
pop,
it with
pop.
each toe.
No, that should be our challenge before the next podcast filming. Like we
Definitely.
should all pick something up with our toes and get our brain working because we have
Yeah.
incredible nerve endings. So let's end the podcast with the same way we started it by asking, how did the brain name itself?
Yeah, so the takeaway that I got from it was that, you know, when we're babies, we learn to name things, and the brain just had to name itself in that way from naming
From the
things.
social context,
From
yeah.
yeah.
Social pressure.
Yeah.
I think the brain is just too obsessed with surviving and living. It is that gym bro that's just trying to bulk up and I am the best.
Yeah, so it had to name
the only
itself.
way it could control itself is by learning about itself and by defining itself.
For survival.
That
true.
is its protein.
Right, pass on its genetics, survive, find food, and it has to name food, then it has
Yeah.
to name itself. Who's finding the food?
You
Oh,
can't
I am.
have power without control, and the way to control it is know your enemy. Your enemy is yourself, the brain.
Dang, heating up in here.
Yeah.
Turn on the fireplace.
Definitely.
It's so weird because the brain had to learn English. It had to understand verbs and nouns just to put a sentence together to even ask that question about the brain. Because it's like that one meme that was like, the brain says it's the most important organ in your body, according to the brain. You know, because it's all coming from the same place.
By
It's
the
just
most
this-
trusted
Yeah,
professional,
like,
the
Let me
brain.
tell you what's most important in your body. The brain. What uses the most energy? The brain. But yeah, to me, it just always comes back to stripping away all that context, and what you're left with is just like this neural network, this evolving piece of putty that has patterns, and it only accepts electrical signals. So the brain isn't naming itself as much as it's probably evolving for survival, and it has one general algorithm, and that algorithm in this case was, how do you name yourself? And that's only because of our society, because we're curious about our own brains, but it really could have been its own pattern of anything in the universe that
And why
had a
did the
pattern.
brain say that it was the most important? To survive.
To survive, yeah.
I think we're all just puppets being manipulated
It
by a
feels
brain.
like it, yeah, man. Just
Ooh.
for mating and food, it's like everything all just comes down to those
The
things.
point of living is just to protect.
Yeah. And then, of course, like when
That
the
little
brain
parasite.
realizes, like, oh, I don't live forever, like the brain's like, whoa, we got to figure this out, you know? Like when we
Definitely.
first realized that we're not immortal.
That's true.
All right.
Very cool.
Well, I felt like it was good. So you guys enjoyed the book overall?
Yeah, it was
absolutely.
incredible. Would definitely recommend.
Okay. All right. We'll see you guys next week then.
Yeah. Good.